Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. Welcome back to Grid Connections, the podcast where we explore all things transportation, clean energy, and our power grid connecting all of these systems together. The auto industry is in flux, and our March panel is here to break it all down. John McElroy, the president of Autoline Network, Loren McDonald, the chief data analyst at Paren, and Matt Teske, CEO of Chargeway, all join us again to unpack the shifting EV market, dealership battle, and the policy changes shaping the future of electric mobility. We discuss everything from Trump's tariffs and their impact on electric vehicles automakers, Tesla's brand shift, how Elon's politics are reshaping its customer base, the state of EV charging, NEVI delays, infrastructure expansion, and Tesla's gold standard network, along with the fight over direct-to-consumer EV sales, Volkswagen's Scout Motors versus dealership lobbyists. Who will win? All of these things we discuss in today's episode. If you're passionate about the future of electric vehicles, this is an episode you won't want to miss. Share it with at least one person who would enjoy the conversation too. Plus, leave us a positive review and sign up for our brand new Grid Connections newsletter via the link in today's show notes. All of these things help us to continue to bring great episodes like today to you and many, many more. With that, enjoy. I think anyone that's been listening to our series for quite a while is probably familiar with all these faces, and I'm just going to do an intro anyway for any new listeners, and I'm going to go in order of who I see in the tiles here. But we were greeted today by Loren McDonald, the chief analyst of Paren, Matt Teske, founder and CEO of Chargeway, and of course, John McElroy, the founder of Blue Sky Productions, and as many of you probably know, Autoline and Autoline After Hours. Thank you, gentlemen, for all being on today. I think we have quite a few topics to cover. And real briefly, if you guys can do the one sentence, two sentence elevator pitch of what you guys do for those who may not be familiar. And Loren, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, chief analyst with Paren, and we are an EV charging and electric vehicle data firm and focused particularly around reliability, usability, session data on almost all of the U.S. Fast charging stations.
Matt, I'll let you go next.
All right. I'm Matt Teske. I'm the founder and CEO of Chargeway, and it is the best mobile app out there for finding EV charging stations and planning road trips. It makes it super simple. You just add your EV, and we color code the plugs and show you power route on the map to make it super simple. You can download that on iOS and Android, and we also work directly with a lot of partners, including electric utility companies, auto dealers, and as well as even policymakers around how we just make the EV experience for charging better.
And I'm John McElroy.
But not least, John McElroy.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Chase. I'm John McElroy. I'm the president of Blue Sky Productions. We put out all kinds of video and other coverage of the global automotive industry, anything and everything to do with the automotive industry.
Well, I think that's a pretty good point to kind of jump off today, because what isn't going on in the auto industry today, John? Nothing. Business as normal is not kind of what we would be even having this conversation about, one, but two, like, John, we got so many great topics to go over today, but I'm curious, as someone who's been kind of a part of the industry and just tracking the industry for so long, what about right now? I was going to say maybe since we last spoke a couple of months ago, but there's too many things that have happened even since then. But like within the last month, what to you is just like really standing out about what is making this time so unique and so different in the automotive industry right now?
Well, in case people don't know, there's a new president in the United States, and his name is Donald J. Trump. And in 1 month, he has turned the industry completely upside down. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. We're talking tariffs, of course, but also government regulation. He's going to gut everything to do with EVs he can get his hands on. I would love to hear Matt talk about this too when we get to that. Gutting everything to do with EV charging. He wants to destroy the California ZEV mandate. I don't know what I'm leaving out, but Chase, this industry is in shell shock.
Yeah, I was going to say, for maybe our one listener who's waking up out of a coma today, maybe those are headlines they haven't seen yet. But yeah, I think those are a lot of the topics we really wanted to cover today. So you said it, let's kick it off. Let's go with the tariffs. I feel like that keeps changing every day, what we're expecting to happen. And then there's a new development in it. John, why don't, I mean, maybe why don't you kind of, I mean, you're the one that has been so locked into this, and being in Detroit, you're hearing from everyone about what is they think's going to happen, what then actually happens, and how they're reacting to it. So like, maybe let's just kick off there, what you're hearing and seeing and how people are reacting to all this.
Well, look, everyone's trying to figure out this president. I mean, he's something of a chameleon. He's very unpredictable. He changes things a lot. I think part of his modus operandi is to make sure that he's at the top of the news cycle 24/7.
That's the main goal. That and chaos. Those are the two main goals. Being you know, remember, it goes back to my audience is the biggest audience. So that's literally, you know, the number one goal is I just want to be the top of the news and the topic of discussion. And two, I want to create chaos, which feeds point one.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, at the beginning of the year, he said, look, I'm going to lay tariffs out there. And then when we got up to his deadline, he said, okay, I'm going to delay it a month. And of course, for the first month, everyone's talking about it. Now for the second month, everybody's talking about it. And we get up to the deadline and he says, okay, I've put the tariffs in place. And then the next day or two later, he goes, you know what? We're going to delay it another month. And so again, boom, he's at the top of the news cycle. Everybody in the world is constantly talking about Donald Trump, which is exactly the way he wants it. So the people in the industry are trying to figure out, what is he really going for here? And it's pretty clear. I mean, you know, you have to parse through everything he's saying, but he feels that the U.S. has been something of a patsy, letting so many imports into this, imported cars and trucks into the U.S. Meanwhile, most other countries have import tariffs on American vehicles that are significantly higher than what the U.S. charge. I mean, the U.S. charges next to nothing, 2.5% for passenger vehicles. If it's a truck, like a pickup truck or a commercial truck, it's 25%. Although Trump did not put that in. That goes back to the Lyndon Baines Johnson administration when that went in. But anyway, Trump says, hey, wait a minute, you know, I want to bring more jobs back to the U.S. And he's definitely going to renegotiate the USMCA, you know, the free trade agreement. The free trade agreement, by the way, which he negotiated.
Not to cut you off, but I guess for anyone listening who's familiar, that was kind of what NAFTA 2.0 during his last administration.
Correct. Yeah, USMCA, US, Mexico, Canada, free trade agreement. So Trump renegotiated NAFTA, and now he's trashing the very pact that he negotiated. Now, what he wants is clear. He wants to renegotiate. It's up for review. I think it's June or July 2026. And what he's saying, I believe, is I want these negotiations to start a whole lot faster. And so he's pressuring the Canadians and the Mexicans. And when he's done with that, and we don't know when that's going to get done, he's going to turn his guns on the Europeans, the Japanese, and the South Koreans. I mean, it's pretty clear here. And he's talking in terms of reciprocity, and I kind of agree with him on that. It's like, we're going to charge you the same tariffs you charge us. And so you can either lower your tariffs or we're going to charge your tariffs. And the net result of this, I think, will be some more production in the U.S., some more U.S. jobs. But look, what's going to happen is prices of vehicles are going to go up. What happens when prices go up? Sales go down. What happens when sales go down? You start laying people off. So I don't see a big net gain in production and jobs coming out of it. And by the way, and we're already seeing it happen, the supplier industry especially is going crazy with robotics and automation, because they don't want to end up paying UAW wages. And the cost of robots and automation is coming down so fast right now. And remember, these robots, they never get tired. They never take a break. They don't go on vacation. They don't show up late for work. They can work 2 shifts back to back. So the ROI on getting these robots, even though they're kind of expensive, compared to a full-blown UAW job, the ROI is like 2 years. So anyway, that's in a nutshell what I think is going on with the industry now.
Well,
John,
Before John and Matt, before Lauren and Matt hop in, I know they're going to have all sorts of interesting takes on this. But one thing I just want to add to that was the Autoline Daily you had today about kind of BMW having a Mexican factory and how that plays into this. There's certain specifics now of what vehicles can qualify from Mexico. But now there's, like, I think you said like VW's plant does qualify. BMW unfortunately doesn't make. Can you just add a little bit of context for that for listeners too? Because that's really interesting. That plays into all of this.
Right. So there's local content rules, I guess I would call it, that if you want to bring vehicles in from Canada or Mexico, tariff free, 70% of the aluminum and steel has to come from North America. 75% of the parts and components have to come from North America. 40% of the labor has to be, on average, jobs that pay at least $16 an hour. And there's another one that I'm missing there. The core components like engines and transmissions have to be made in North America. But the penalty, if you don't meet any of those, and you got to meet all of them to not pay the tariff, you pay a 2.5% tariff. So BMW has figured, screw it, we'll just eat the tariff. And if we build a whole lot more stuff in Mexico, we'll save more than what paying the tariff is going to cost us. So they are not compliant. And again, this gets back to why Trump wants to raise the tariff. He doesn't want it to be 2.5%. I don't know what the final number will be, but he's going to force companies like BMW to become compliant.
John, I was just gonna add, I think it's interesting to look at the two different approaches of how, sort of Biden was approaching sort of the, build cars in America through, incentives. So offering loans to Kia and Hyundai and companies like that to build factories in the South and battery factories. And so we saw, joint ventures between non-US Asian battery companies and U.S. companies to open and build factories. We saw the rules and requirements around the tax credit and stuff, requiring more and more of the minerals and stuff be, from North America or free trade countries that we have agreements with, et cetera. Right. So like Biden's approach was, yes, we're gonna require more things be made in America, but we're gonna help you with that. We're gonna provide, loans, grants, incentives. You do this, we'll give you this, encourage you, and that type of thing. Consumers will be rewarded if they buy those vehicles. Whereas Trump, it's a real estate deal. It's just all a negotiation, right? It's just, I'm going to offer you this. What are you going to offer me back? Right. It's a sort of completely different style, but it feels like they're sort of the same goal though. Right. Which is to have more cars built and assembled in America.
No, you're right, Loren. There's one key difference though. The Biden stuff was all about electric vehicles.
Yeah. Right.
And the Trump administration and Donald J himself wants nothing to do with electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So you're right. The Biden administration provided really good incentives to get the EV industry launched in the United States and not rely on China. And that was what the bottom line is. We did not want to be reliant on China. And this need to not rely on China goes well beyond the auto industry. It has a lot of national security implications, aerospace, space, military stuff, and the like. So, you would have thought maybe Trump would keep that stuff that Biden put there in place because, it unleashed, I don't know, tens of billions, if not more, of foreign investment in the U.S.
Yeah.
And by the way, and you guys know this better than I did, most of those battery plants are in red states, Republican states.
Right. Yeah.
So now, having said, he's trashed the EV subsidies and expressed that he doesn't like EVs and the like. Nothing has happened yet. They have not been cut yet.
That's a great call out. I was going to mention that too.
Yeah.
And so I see a couple of other things going on here. Number one, dealers are overwhelmingly Republican. And dealers have made it very clear they're not enamored of EVs. But as of right now, they have something like $7 billion worth of EVs sitting on their lots in inventory. So they're telling the administration, don't pull the plug yet. We got to sell these things.
Yeah.
So if and when the administration drops the $7,500 sales rebate, it'll probably be phased in over many months to allow the dealers to clear their inventory. Because, I mean, the NADA, the National Auto Dealers Association, in my humble opinion, is probably the most powerful lobbying group in Washington. More powerful than the NRA, the National Rifle Association. And that's because there's a dealership in every single community, all across the country. They sponsor the little league teams and the soccer teams. They provide the convertibles for the Labor Day parade. They donate to the political campaigns of every politician in their district, state, or county. Mm-hmm. And so they're very powerful. And so if they say, hey, Mr. President, we love you dearly, but don't yank those just yet, he will pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I think the bigger impact, since the tax credit is only available to whatever it is, it changes constantly, like 13, 12, 15 EVs, is the loss of the lease loophole, right? Because the real thing, and this is, Jay's probably a whole separate topic we might get into, but just the growth and shift to people realizing that leasing an EV is both, they can get a better EV at a much lower monthly payment, but also the EV is getting better every 18 months. So I might as well do a 3-year lease,
try it out,
and then get one that's got 50 more miles of range. It can charge faster. It has better software, better on and on and on. And so I think we've seen a lot of people start to understand that and move to the leasing, and then you get the loophole and get the full 7,500 credit built into your monthly payment. So I think that's the bigger impact than the direct 7,500 loss if that goes away.
Yeah, I mean all of this conversation, the thing that I think about is it's the amount of noise that is being created through all of this, and the amount of then analyzing of what's going on, what is the game plan here, and frankly, where I've landed, just personally, is I'm tired of hearing about Trump. I'm tired of hearing about Musk. I think that the ramifications of what they're both doing and the impact, what will happen on a local level from a community perspective, then you go up to the states and county, state, and everything else. It's going to be felt in a very real way, and we're already seeing it, and it's just going to continue to get worse. So, as to asking what is his game plan, I don't think there is a plan. Most of what he does is for just pure attention, or we're also seeing basically vengeance, as it relates to what was happening when I was not in office? I was being investigated by whom and who else? And okay, well then we'll just take care of that. And I think that, all the things that will happen with the automotive sector, we're going to have to figure it out. There's no way around that. I think that if you take a step back and you really look at it from a global perspective, I think that if you're at General Motors or if you're at Ford or, any of the big 2.5, is you're looking at it saying, well, we still compete globally. We still do. We have to. And we have to maintain innovating, because everybody else outside, everybody across the Atlantic and across the Pacific, they're all trying to figure out how they maintain innovating as it relates to the automotive industry. And we are basically throwing a stick in the spokes of progress related to what we've been trying to do with that domestically right now. And, and part of what's, wielding that is Musk and the things that he's doing. And I just, frankly, it's just gonna get worse. I don't want to try to figure out what was he thinking? He's not. That's giving him way too much credit. And he'd rather have a photo op with his signature on a piece of paper saying, I made another erroneous opinion or another EO about this is gonna change now. It's not with Congress, without them on board. No, it won't. And I'm at least happy to see the judiciary stepping in and finally putting a pause on the pauses they're making and saying, you can't do this. And so there's a glimmer of hope there. But what happens amidst all this? We all, podcasts, communities, industry, everybody spend exhaustive amount of time talking about it and asking and that's part of the game plan is like, we're all so distracted by all this. And I just want to take a step back and say, well, brass tacks, what is it? Trump is a terrible diplomat. He's a terrible deal maker. He's trying to dismantle his own deal he made 4 or 5 years ago. It's just like, the obviousness of how bad it is to me is just, okay, let's just call it for what it is. He's not good at this. And the people that he's also bringing in to help are not good at this. And we're all going to suffer for it, industry and individuals alike. And I guess where do we go from there? To me, that's where we go from there is how do we talk about the solutions to this, not analyzing what he was thinking. I mean, that's just my 2 cents.
I think that's a great call on that, because I was really hoping that this conversation wouldn't be, I mean, obviously there's impacts of the decisions and what we're seeing in the industry, but I completely agree with you that a lot of the takes are focused on like headline Trump, yada, yada, yada. Like the actual takes and like substance of it are very low level. And it really just seems to be like clicks, ads, and selling newspapers, whoever 5 people that still buy physical newspapers.
If the Economist puts him on the cover one more time, I swear to God, I'm going to scream.
I mean, and I think it's like a kind of self-propelled doom loop as far as like people just tuning out more and more. Well, and
it creates conversation. You said clicks and sells whatever. And it's just, again, it is exhausting. And the worst part about it is if you actually take some time to have conversations with people that, again, the social media narrative and like that type of discourse never helps, doesn't work. Right. I've had some some phone calls with friends who we clearly aren't on the same page about things, but we've had some conversations where it's like, okay, there's a promise here that we're at least on the same page, that we can all agree that this is not, no one voted for this. Like no one voted for what's happening right now. But we can, I think for the most part, agree about that. But then it's where do we go from here? And you see these local town halls for, in red states where these GOP representatives are just getting shouted down when they make these just like talking point remarks about, and the things that are happening with Doge are really having a positive. And these people just start yelling and booing. And then these representatives just walk out. It's like, okay, so at what point do we actually say, all right, we collectively agree this is not working? And I mean, we're only 7 weeks, 8 weeks into this, or not even.
I kind of agree with you, but what I will say, that's 2 things there. One is, I mean, you live in Oregon too. I'm out in the gorge now, and there is a huge difference between like 4 to 6 years ago when Trump was. It just seems so much more muted. It's just like, okay, whatever. We're starting to see like more people do. There's like protests here and there, but it's like nothing to the scale it was. But what you bring up is really interesting, and we'll get to actually the important stuff, the cars and electric vehicles here in a second. But what's really interesting to what you're talking about with like some of these in-person like town hall protests is it does remind me a lot of kind of like the Tea Party movement on the right in 2012, where it's like people kind of disregarded. It was quieter for a while. Oh, let's see. We might have lost John there for a second, but then it kind of has now grown and shifted. And I think it is a large response to the fact that like the actual Democratic Party is just like in shambles and confused as what to do themselves. Like their messaging has just been awful.
They don't
wherever you lie on the political spectrum, I think they have just leaned into. We'll see. It's still early on. Hopefully they figure something out. Competition is good. Doesn't matter what the medium. But what I'm really kind of interested about is like, obviously we're talking about the larger automotive impacts and kind of what it means for trade. But and we'll see if John comes back for this. But what I think is really interesting is everyone's talking about electric vehicles. Everyone's talking about like how these impacts affect the automakers, but no one's really talking about what we're seeing is like EV growth is still going.
It's still going.
But the actual overall auto market is shrinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of curious on your guys' thoughts with what that actually means. Well, and there is kind of a point, like if that keeps growing and the rest of it keeps shrinking, that you kind of have to face the facts, especially if you want to keep some of these jobs, that you have to put some investments and double down on electric vehicles.
Do you want to pause there to see if we can get John back in?
Why don't you, I'm sure Loren and you've got some thoughts on that, or at least maybe what you're seeing, and hopefully we'll have John back here shortly.
Well, I think to the point that you made about it, it is still naturally growing in the way that it's year over year. We're still seeing growth. I mean, Loren, you had a really insightful post today on LinkedIn about that year over year growth as it related to new models hitting the market. And what was it that was, existing growth as opposed to new
Yeah.
growth. And I thought that was a really good call out. It still points to the fact that there's growth. But as we
Yeah.
maintain bringing new models to market and new options to market, I think it's helpful. The damage that's been done and is being done daily still to the Tesla brand because of what is happening with Musk and his, what he's doing within the political realm is very, very real. And then it provides opportunity for other brands to step up and say, well, hey, we also make electric cars. And I saw that firsthand at the Portland Auto Show a few weeks ago when people that were, interested in talking about electric cars, a lot of them, I had literally dozens of conversations with people saying, and again, Portland is just like San Francisco where you are, Loren, it's a Tesla stronghold in the sense it's one of the cities that grew the quickest.
But also a very, very liberal and politically correct markets.
Yeah,
right?
They're bubbles unto themselves for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of those people that we talked to were just saying, hey, I've had a Tesla for X amount of years and we just want to get rid of it. So we're looking at what our options are. And so that, those are very real things that are going to have, very real impacts on the industry. And so to your point, Chase, about or whether it was John that said about, over $7 billion of inventory that's sitting on these dealer lots it's like, we got to move these things too. How effective will they be at that? Or are we just in another weird moment of the EV adoption cycle where we didn't see this coming, but now all of a sudden we're going to see interest in non-Tesla EVs potentially selling, but to existing EV drivers who just want to get out of what they have. Yeah. So we're not exactly moving the market as much as we're just like, shuffling the cards.
And I'm still not 100% convinced that isn't just narrative.
How do you mean?
Because I feel like I think is that definitely a thing for sure. But is that like what people kind of, I think there's so many of these kind of going back to like what people print and what people talk about as narrative versus like factual. Whereas like leading up to the election, there was a lot of stuff like, oh, I think Kamala Harris is going to win. And it was, once again, not to make it blow, it was kind of a blowout. And I think just what I'm seeing already, like I feel like there was a huge, and once again, this is very anecdotal and this is why I don't like it. But what is fascinating to me is like, as a counterpoint, not that I necessarily agree with it, new Model Ys going, shipping out. I was just, before this, I was just like hopping on, looking at like a lot of the famous YouTubers who post all sorts of cars. Mm-hmm. They're doing Model Y reviews. You go like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, first thing would be all these things, anti-alien, all this stuff. None of those were even in the comments this time. So I'm like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I totally agree with you. It doesn't actually move the needle for EV sales. And I do think that wherever you fall on the political spectrum, his Elon and Tesla's kind of image, it's obviously shifted a bit. But I just don't think
it's shifted more than a bit.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is also like, I agree with you. It is a thing, but I also think it is kind of the bubble effect. Because I talk to people, I consistently hear, and I'm now, once again, I do not think it's a 1-for-1, but I am seeing people who are conservative who are buying some EVs. And I'm like, what?
Oh, no, that's very true.
And once again, I don't think it's a 1-for-1, but it is. And once again, there's still a big gap between all of this inventory sitting on dealership, the electric vehicles sitting on dealerships. And I do think that there has just been this idea that, well, since Elon's gone to the right, all these other EVs are just going to start magically selling. And no, they're not going to magically sell at all. Wasn't my point at all. I think I'm not saying it is, but I just wanted to kind of jump in and just say like, that seems to be so much of the commentary I've been hearing from that bubble.
So
I want to kind of have a conversation with this panel, especially like, what is it that's actually going to move that metal, whether it's Elon or not? Because I was talking to someone the other day who bought a Rivian, great car. So like, well, I bought it because I didn't like Elon. It's like, is that the only reason? You must have bought for some other reason. Is that literally, because that's not a business model for them as a company. And they're like, well, it was also cool. Like, yeah, that's great. It's that optics level. And I always am always trying to push back on like anecdote versus the fact. And I know I just use a lot of anecdotes, but this is my show.
That's fine.
But I am curious. I'm generally just curious on what you guys think of that and like trying to distill it further.
I don't think Elon being, divisive is going to move a bunch of other brands' EVs. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see some people like we saw at the Portland Auto Show saying like, hey, I'm looking for options because I frankly just don't want to have this vehicle anymore. I mean, that's happening. I mean, we're seeing a variety of talking points around people. I mean, they're calling it things like swastika and things like that. Yeah. And we're seeing vandalism. I mean, the Tesla showroom here in Portland was shot up yesterday morning.
Yeah.
And so and it happened in Salem, Oregon a few weeks ago where they had to have it shut down for 2 weeks. And the one comment I did hear from a friend of mine who will remain nameless, though, who works at Tesla, he said, he's like, our foot traffic has completely died as it relates to people coming in looking at the vehicles. He said our foot traffic where we have, showrooms in red states has gone up.
Interesting.
He said, however, those people that are coming in saying they really think Elon's great for whatever reason they've concluded from their perspective, if it's politically driven, he's like, they don't have the income to buy our cars.
Yeah.
He said, so they might have interest from a political or emotional or ideological perspective about what he's doing, but it's not going to help us move metal. So who cares?
So will that mean Tesla's going to finally do the $25,000 car? Is that the...
Wouldn't that have been nice? No, I mean,
that's if he was actually running the company and making decisions around that, right?
That's a valid point. I finally said to somebody today, they asked me, like, what is he doing? I said, he got bored with running Tesla. He doesn't care anymore. He in his mind, he solved that thing, and it's just doing its thing now.
That's a really good point, and I was thinking about that this morning. Not to get off topic, because I want to come back to the Tesla owner kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, if we think about Elon, what he helped start PayPal. He solved like a financial payment thing. Then he did, Tesla, SpaceX, boring tunnel, like whatever it is he's a starter, not a finisher, right? Like he solves his mission in life is to be thought of as the smartest guy ever and to solve every problem known to man. And so he just moves. And so I solved the electric vehicle issue. Like, so now he's bored with it. Now he's solving government waste.
And it is interesting because it's always like phrased now anytime it comes up about Tesla specifically, it's like autonomy. And I think you can maybe say, is he trying to hype the stock? Whatever, sure. But that seems to genuinely be, it seems like he's way more interested in autonomous and robotics than he is anything in
AI, right? Like,
well, look, he needs autonomy. He needs a whole bunch of people paying $8,800 or whatever he's charging for FSD, right?
Yep.
And look what just happened in China. BYD said, "Meh, let's make it free."
That's wild. Yeah.
Ouch. Yeah.
So I mean, try charging customers $8,000 when a just as good a system is free.
Yep.
Chase, I want to come back to the kind of your previous point and Matt's comments around Teslas. So, I don't have good data on this, but I've always wondered each year what percentage of Tesla's sales are to existing owners. So, we're on our third Tesla lease, right? We got our first one in December of 2016, and it's going to be our last, right? And not just for political reasons, is my wife and I are just tired of the windshield wipers not working, right? Because they still can't get the software.
On a sunny day at the stoplight, you don't like it when it just turns on?
No, I don't. Or when it's like a thunderstorm and the wipers go like this, or don't come on, right? And that we have to stop and go into the TV screen in our car and trying to find the button that we push to open the glove box instead of reaching over and pressing a button. Now, my wife and I, as you can tell by the wrinkles on my face, are not, young kids and stuff. But it's so the politics is part of it. But we're just not fans of
the experience. And I think that's totally fair. Yeah.
And stuff like that. But my point is not to make it sort of personal, but I think one of Tesla's problems is just the significant percentage of existing owners that are just going to not buy another Tesla or not lease another Tesla. Yeah. And I don't know if that's 10% each year or 20% or whatever it is, but it's a significant nut to crack right off the top. Outside of attracting, like somebody buying a Tesla versus a Lucid or a Chevy or whatever it is, right? And I think that's a big problem. The second thing is, and I meant to look it up before I jumped on, but I didn't. But I did some analysis a few weeks ago, and I think I determined that there's something like 40 BEV models that in essence compete with the Model Y. They're in the like $40,000 to $70,000 price range, and they're an SUV crossover, et cetera, or something like that, right? Right, because if you look at all the models coming to market, they're in that sort of typically mid-size SUV crossover range, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking of getting a Tesla Model Y, which is the most popular vehicle in the world, right? A few years ago, there was 10 legitimate competitors. Now there's 30, 40 legitimate competitors. And so I don't think the refresh is going to have much impact at all. It might get 2% of people, to go for it, but it's still a Tesla Model Y that has a few improvements and stuff. I don't think it's going to move the needle. I think there are too many other options and negative factors going on. So
yeah, I think those are good points. And now that we have John back, I don't know if I'm pretty sure this was an Autoline Daily like a week ago, that there was still a poll that Teslas did have I want to say it was like then GM had still the highest brand loyalty for resale. I don't know if you remember that, John, or I thought that was like one of the things that was from a recent thing you guys covered.
No, what we recently reported on vis-a-vis General Motors is it scored spectacularly well on J.D. Power's vehicle dependability study. Now remember, this is a study that J.D. Powers does after 3 years of ownership. And like Buick was second to Lexus, and Chevrolet, GMC, and Cadillac scored better than Porsche and Mercedes and BMW. And everybody sort of looked at it like, wow, Tesla was way down the list, by the way. And so, going back to what you were just saying, Loren, Tesla heretofore has had the highest loyalty in the business. And in fact, like 1 or 2 years ago, the Model Y, scored unbelievable numbers, like 70% loyalty, over 70%, and which is unheard of in the industry.
Yeah.
But I agree with you guys. I think the Model Y refresh is not going to be enough to put it back to being number one again. Now, having said that, in Autoline Daily today, we reported that there's a media source in China saying Tesla got 200,000 pre-orders for the refresh, the Juniper model. Now we'll see if that makes a difference. Maybe in China it will, but you guys have seen the sales numbers coming out of Europe, coming out of Australia. I mean, they are cratering.
50-60%
down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So,
and again, and when people say, "Oh, it's because of the Model Y refresh and people weren't terribly excited about it," or "Oh, they had to retool some stuff," I'm like, "I'm sorry, I have eyes and ears."
Yeah.
When you have a toxic CEO, then it impacts that is intertwined with your brand. That impacts people's perception of what they're willing to put their money toward. I mean, it's not 100%.
I don't want this to.
But,
yeah, and I think that's a great point, Matt. And I don't want this to be the whole conversation today, but I'm going to throw something past everyone. Coincidentally, Tesla isn't the first car brand around today that's had a very controversial founder. How does Tesla move forward? Does he?
You're talking about Henry Ford?
Yeah. That's one of a few. I think John's kind of cracking a laugh. I know he can think of probably a couple of names. But what I'm curious on your thoughts is like, does he just become like chairman of the board or something like that? Does he have to sell all his shares, or what realistically do you think that step looks forward? I mean, and I think you all kind of said it. He's the only thing that he seems really interested with Tesla right now at the moment is autonomy. If they do actually start launching full self-driving, like they've talked about in some of these cities into this year and next, then he's kind of achieved all the steps. I mean, other than the Optimus robot thing, but that's a whole nother story. But it seems like he's achieved a lot of the things that he wants to do.
Well, look, this is where the board's got to step up. And any other board at any other publicly traded company would have said, "Hey, Jack, you're out of here. You can't do all this stuff that's destroying the shareholder value. We have a fiduciary duty to do something here."
Yep.
Well,
but what's the board doing? They're dumping their stock. They're trying to cash out as fast as they can, or at least we know the chairperson the chair board or the board chair.
It's not Kimball and some of the other ones have been selling as well.
Right.
I believe I saw.
So, I mean,
Now,
this is, you do not have an independent board in the case of Tesla. And shareholders should be the ones that are screaming bloody murder about this, because he's wiped out just in the last 2 months or the last month, what, 200, $300 billion of value?
Yeah.
I mean, no other company would stand for this. But Elon's got, the board in his pocket.
Yeah, he made them all rich.
Yeah, John, and I don't think the board is going to do anything. That's clear. I think what's going to be interesting to see is if some of the major institutional investors start pulling out.
Well,
right?
And you're right, Loren, but they're still mesmerized too. It's hard to bet against Elon and Tesla. It's hard to do it because anybody who's done it in the past got their clocks clean. And there's still this hope. Some of the investors have said, they're down on their knees praying that the robo-taxi thing really happens and proves to be brilliant, that FSD truly is autonomous, and that the Optimus robots start building cars, and then it goes back to over $1 trillion. So they're going to keep their powder dry for the moment. But I got to tell you, if the Q1 sales look as bad as it sounds like they're going to be, and maybe it's got to go to the end of Q2 to really verify it, then I think you'll see the institutional investors, screaming at the board, they got to do something.
Yeah, John, that was a point I wanted to make earlier, is that I think Q2 is going to be the one that really tells us what's going on, because I think
kind of hard to say the thing about the Model Y anymore,
because I think there's a lot of people, like every day that goes by, Musk is pissing off more and more people that don't like his politics and what he's doing, right? And people don't just, it's not like you're running out to the store and buying milk, right? Like car is like, when is my lease up? When are my kids going to college and I have to, buy a new car? There's a lot of other factors that determine the timing of when you buy it. And so I think we could see a delay, if you will, of really start to seeing people say, nope, I'm not getting another Tesla, or I'm not getting a Tesla, starting in the next couple of months as things just get worse and worse and worse from their perspective. So Q1 is probably going to be fairly ugly, but Q2 could be even worse.
Now, I will say, I literally just looked it up. Tesla stock is still up 46% from 1 year ago today, even with the slide back, and GM's is only up 18%. So take that data with it.
It's skyrocketed.
And I think the only thing I would add to that is I agree with the thoughts on the institutional investors, but the big thing is it is like the key retail meme stock.
Yeah.
And good or bad, and I think a lot of that was originally because of their mission compared to others, that people were investing in it, and now it's kind of become a bit of a kind of like a Bitcoin pump stock and all that stuff. But the other interesting thing, because I was talking with someone about this the other day, is that you're totally right, John. Like any other board of a automotive company would have jumped in and done something, but with Tesla, I mean, they are kind of whether you want to, they're valued as one, whether you want to look at them as a tech stock or not, that's a whole nother idea. But they have the setup of a tech company and follow that kind of legendary Steve Jobs. And this is kind of what we've seen with all the tech companies since then, where like with Zuckerberg at Meta, that they have so much of their own ownership of the company and kind of who they choose for the board to prevent being pushed out. And good or bad, I think that really is what I don't really see how that would change unless he wants to step down. I think it would be really hard for even some of the institutional ones, just because they seem so set with that vision. Not saying that it can't happen, but it is just such a fascinating, unique
I agree with that take. I think the only thing that's going to change this is basically consumers where they're shopping, and shareholders, and individual shareholders saying we're done. And I really don't see the board doing what would be traditionally done. Institutional investors, to the argument of like it's going to take some more time for them to see real pain, like through Q2. I agree with that, because again, they're not going to make a 90-day assessment on this.
Yeah,
but I don't, short of some very come to Jesus type moments from Musk, where he's like, okay, yeah, I'm okay. I got it wrong here a bit. Sorry, everybody. And last time I checked, he doesn't do that.
He
Just
doesn't do
like Donald Trump doesn't do that. So, I mean, when the damage like this is done to this scale, you don't just turn it around and come back. I mean, this was a legitimate turning point for this company, and where it can go. And I don't think Optimus and autonomy and FSD is going to save what's happening right now. There's too much toxicity around it. And at the end of the day, humans have to be buying in on products and services and brands. And there's now a ton of people that made the foundation of Tesla's, cult following what it has been. There's a lot of those people hitting the eject button. Now, does that mean that are those gaps going to be filled by people that are in red states that are really excited about what Elon's up to from a political perspective? We've already heard. I mean, I've heard from people that are working at Tesla saying they can't fill the gap. So by the way, I think I'm going to go back and just rewind on one of our last conversations. And I am going to stick to the fact that I just don't think the Cybertruck is going to be around in 3 years. And I did say, okay, maybe 5, but gosh, here's $6,000 off and free supercharging for life. Please take these things off our hands. I mean,
Chase, I think you had it was Michael Murphy, right? The guy on recently. I haven't had a chance to watch that. I apologize, but he had a fascinating survey, right? That showed that what was it? I might get this wrong, but the Tesla brand is now more popular with people that drive gas cars than people that
gas
that
trucks.
drive EVs. Yeah, gas
John,
trucks.
you talked to him too.
Yeah, I did. I love Mike Murphy. He's great to talk to. But that was the point he made, is that MAGA loves Musk, but they don't love EVs.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, and they don't buy them, that at that level, right? I mean, Republicans do, right? I live in a very upscale I call it the Orange County of the North market here in the East Bay, my little town and stuff, right? And there's gazillion Teslas. I pull up to a stoplight and every car is a Tesla, right? And so conservatives do buy Teslas, but not at the number and volume across the U.S. that those on the left side of the spectrum do. And so it isn't it isn't a one-for-one thing, to use your term, Chase. But the other thing, and that I think you'll come back to this, that I think is fascinating. We just talk about, like, what is Tesla? Remember when Tesla was going to be like this energy company, right? That the sales of power walls and storage and batteries and everything like that was going to be like outsell the automotive revenue. He doesn't even talk about solar and batteries anymore.
It wasn't even his idea. It was JB Straubel's idea. And JB had to make a skunkworks team in Tesla to even build out that product line and then show it to when they were done. So no, again, in Trump and Musk are very similar in that way, in the sense that they just have some kind of a tunnel vision sometimes on what they want to think and talk about. They'll take full credit all the time if something goes right, but I don't see how. I mean, again, I think he's just bored with the company. And Loren, you bring up a good point. Like, things that were supposed to be these mainstay elements of the business, all of a sudden it's like, wait, we never even hear about it. And
we haven't heard much about the 20 million units in sales in 2030 recently. Has anybody noticed that? Remember that?
Yeah, that's probably not going to be achieved.
Yeah, where's that Mexican plant too?
Yeah, those renderings were good.
I will say, I mean, their Powerwall growth, and that has been actually pretty decent, but I agree with you. He doesn't really cover it. And I think, I mean, this could be the whole episode, just kind of talking about all these different dynamics, but let's kind of shift, I guess, to, unless there's anything else you guys want to talk about around that, but I guess kind of stay on the topic of Tesla a bit, is around their supercharging network and team. I think one of the really fascinating things that, I guess, speaking some of the protests and all that stuff going around with that, was there was a supercharger that was vandalized. It was on fire in Littleton, Massachusetts. And within 48 hours,
back up and running,
you would never have known.
Yeah.
And I mean, so many of the people that I know that are far from Musk cheerleaders, quite the opposite. They're just like, that's the gold standard. Like, you just can't do better than that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that, I mean, that even puts like some gas locations and providers to shame if a gas pump is down and being
Sure.
able to get that back and running. But I mean, looking at the kind of state of things where EV charging is going, and obviously, Loren, this is kind of your domain of expertise around NEVI and that stuff. But I'm kind of curious on what your thoughts and what you're seeing, because obviously NEVI has been a bit of I think kind of pushing the industry forward, as we've talked about on this channel. But we're also just seeing so much more momentum from a lot of the different players in the space, and would just love to kind of hear your thoughts on where this is going and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of buzz and media coverage and stuff and consternation in industry about the NEVI pause, as we call it in the industry. But and I think, Matt, you were referencing this. There was a court order yesterday that is looking like that it's basically overruling the Trump pause, right, across everything, right?
Yeah.
And so, still it's like, I don't know, 80 pages, and I've only had the chance to read part of it. But from what I can tell, it looks like that Trump, and in our case with NEVI, FHWA cannot stop anything. Right now, they can pause the redoing of the rules, which is separate from congressional approval and stuff. But what we're seeing, though, is just mass confusion and consternation. In fact, and I just was drafted a survey that's going out to a number of the state DOTs, and so I've started to see some of the responses already. But we're interested to learn what the states are ultimately going to do, because what we're seeing is that the states are just totally confused and totally responding differently. We've seen a red state, blue state divide, that the blue states are basically saying, we're not stopping what we're doing, right? They can't. We're moving forward. These things are going to continue. We're still working on our RFPs. We're not going to announce new award winners, but we're continuing our process. And the red states are going, whoa, we're not going to do anything. We're told to stop, right? And sort of a few in between. But the net effect, Chase, is that what we're seeing is that companies that were sort of very dependent on NEVI, shall I say, right? That was sort of a key part of their strategy, whether they're large companies or small companies, are nervous and hurting potentially, right?
Yeah.
And so they're starting to pivot and looking for other grants and incentives. So utility incentives, state incentives, et cetera. In other words, for those companies, and it's actually just a really small number that were very focused and dependent on NEVI, they're just going, okay, we've got to expand our horizon. We can't bet on NEVI. But really, it's most of the companies. You look at the Ionas, right? You look at the Mercedes-Benz, the Walmarts, the BP Pulses, the most of the companies that are now have entered the industry, they have billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars of capital that they're planning to build out charging network. Many of them have publicly stated goals of opening, 5,000, 10,000, charging ports by the end of this decade. NEVI was never important part of their plan, right?
Yeah.
So the reality is, and I think you saw it. I think both of you saw my post this morning, meaning Matt, meaning you and Chase, you and Matt, around that. Like I'm looking at more than 16,000 fast charging ports being opened this year, right? 11,000 of those being non-Tesla, right? And so, despite any pauses with NEVI, like the industry knows
it seems
that we
to be
need
finally
to build
having that
out
momentum and the critical
yeah,
mass
the
to kind of
industry
take
knows
off.
we need to build out charging infrastructure in order to sell more EVs. Companies have bought into it. They've already, carved out billions of dollars. And so they're moving forward. And incentives and grants are still part of how the industry works, but it's just going to shift more to like utility incentives, state incentives, things like that.
Yeah. Now, John, I remember last time we had this panel, I put you on the spot and asked what NEVI stood for. Do you know what it stands for?
I'm going to make it up again.
Yeah. And in your defense, I know I should know this. I usually have to Google it like once a week because I can always get the I confused.
So I'm going to say National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure.
Woohoo!
Is that it? Really?
Yes.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I'm patting myself on the back for everybody who's just listening to this.
And we lost you there for a little bit, John, but now that we do have you back, what you kind of came back into the middle of, in some extent, was like you had mentioned earlier about the 7 billion in vehicles on dealership lots. And I know we've kind of pivoted to obviously the charging infrastructure, but being in Detroit, I mean, with so many of the automakers there, I am kind of curious, like, I know that was a big shift for a lot of the automakers to say, hey, we're moving to the North American charging standard from CCS. This EV charging thing is figured. And that hasn't been 100%. But I'm kind of curious, if you build it, will they come? Now that we have EV charger infrastructure more and more, now that some of these vehicles are coming to market with the North American charging standard as kind of the preferred plug type in the vehicle, do you think that moves the needle in any measurable way for actually people to start getting in EVs and kind of exploring and actually charging on them? Or where do you see the gaps as far as that kind of perception with maybe some of the automakers?
Yeah, look, let me start off by saying this way. Imagine if Tesla had never built the supercharging system. I mean, that alone tells you, absolutely, you need to have this. Yep. What's one of the number one complaints of people about EVs? Well, they're expensive and they don't know how far they can go. But they all say, I don't know where I can plug in. And so the more they see, oh, there's a station, and there's cars plugged in there, they start to get comfortable with the idea that, hey, I can go out here and travel with my EV. Doesn't just have to be around the neighborhood. So, yeah, I think building out the infrastructure, I still think going with the NACS system, it's better. I mean, come on. I'm not the first to say it, but it's almost as if the government should just give all the money to Tesla and say, build it out for us, because they got the best system. It's the most reliable. And it's software defined. They can do software updates for this thing. I don't know that anybody else has got that. So in my book, to get more people into EVs, you got to continue to build out the infrastructure. And we know, I mean, all the studies show there's a big chunk, a big cohort of car buyers out there that says, when I'm comfortable, I'm buying. But they got to see those chargers out there to be comfortable.
So, yeah, no, go ahead, Matt.
I always think back to the UC Davis study from like 5 years ago in California when they asked people if they were comfortable with buying an EV and what percentage said yes or no based on the infrastructure that existed. And then 2 or 3 years passed and they doubled the amount of charging ports in California, and they did the exact same study again. And they asked people, are you comfortable with buying an EV now? And the amount of people that said no doubled. And I thought, okay, like yes, we need to have more infrastructure. We do. But the whole just build it for build its sake doesn't translate to the car buying journey as to how people understand that. And seeing it as one thing, but having it reinforced through the research process, the buying process, and then when you're into ownership and having there be an actual narrative around that. I mean, I will go to my grave one day being the guy that said, we never explained to people that you could use a different fuel other than gasoline in a way that made sense to the public. We forced people to figure it out too much. And yes, I mean, stations like Iona and like what they're building out, which have awnings and bathrooms, and it's really, very well thought out for placement, as opposed to it's on a curb at a Walmart because that's the place we could find the power. And it's we're doing a much better job of how we're designing where the stations should go for humans. But that's not enough. It's a great step, but it's not enough.
But Matt, I would add.
Yeah, and Matt,
go ahead, Loren.
I was just going to say, and Matt, and I think I've shared this on a previous show, but another UC Davis study that came out last year was fascinating, John, in that it what it basically said is that for people that aren't interested in EVs, the actual seeing or not seeing EV charging stations had no impact on because they weren't looking for them, right? So but the people who owned and drove EVs who were considering an EV, seeing or not seeing charging stations actually did matter, right? So the point being is that if there's a brand new exciting Iona charging station down the street and you're driving a Ram pickup and you have no intent to buy, you won't even see it.
You won't know it's there.
It'll be invisible. But if you're driving a Prius and you're thinking your next car is going to be a BEV, you're like, oh yeah, charging station, that's where I could charge, right? Like it's just human nature, right?
Well,
and
the visibility of it is what we've needed, not just the chargers being out in the wild, but the fact that it's a destination, in the sense that, like, when you are driving from maybe a few blocks away, you see an awning with a big logo, and you go, what's that logo mean? And then as you go by, you see people connected and charging. So there's an element about the visibility, messaging, and visibility of it plays a huge role into how they will then inevitably be looking for it, like you're describing.
And I think, Matt, to that point on the visibility, and something that doesn't probably get enough discussion is most of these charging stations are not charging stations, right? They're 2, 4, 8 chargers out in the parking lot at a shopping mall, right? And if you're driving an EV, you're looking for them, you're aware of it. You go, oh, there's the Supercharger, there's the new Electrify America station, or whatever it is. But what we don't have is on every 4 corners, like we have in many cities of America, they're either, there's a McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, and Hardee's, or whatever it is, or there's, a Chevron
76
on every 4 corners, right? It's either fast food or it's gas stations, right? Once we start seeing, a BP, an Iona, Circle K, and a whatever other Electrify America, like on the 4 corners, and it's big signage and awnings and lounges, and people are going there for lots of things, right? Like, that's going to probably start to move the needle.
How about just putting big signage where those chargers are that says EV charging? Because a lot of people will drive by these things, and if no one's charging, they don't know what it is. They think it's some sort of transformer or something. But I would go back and challenge that UC study to this degree. Pull all those chargers out, like I said. Just rip them out of the ground and see what happens to EV sales.
Like we're doing to the GSA chargers that have already been paid for.
Federal ones.
But I have not read the UC study, but I've heard about it, and people are arguing there's no correlation between building out the infrastructure and EV sales. But I would also say, if you go back a few years ago, there was just a lack of knowledge of anything EV. And what has filled the gap in the last few years? It's become entirely politicized. You have all these attacks. They catch fire. They burn down garages. You don't want to park it in your garage. It takes, tens of thousands of gallons to put this out. I mean, and boy, when one catches fire, it's national news. There's, all kinds of attacks on EVs. So if a few years ago you didn't think much about it and you thought, should there be more chargers? And now there's more chargers. And what do you think about EVs? Oh, I don't think they're the right thing, because people have been bombarded with negative EV information.
There's also, and Matt and I could talk about this topic for hours, but in the EV industry, right? What's the first thing that people say about EV charging? Oh, you're going to do 80%, 85, 90, 95% of your charging at home, right? And the only time you use, fast chargers is the once or twice you go out on a road trip, unless you're somebody that, goes out on road trips every day, right? And people who don't have an EV and are thinking about one, they think about, I need public fast charging like a gas station, right? Because I'm going to go to it all the time. Where am I going to charge? Like, people that don't own EVs don't think in the terms that the EV owners do, which is, if they do live in a single family home, they charge, like we charge 98% of the time at home, right?
Well, that's
Um,
the conditioning factor that we're fighting over a century of using liquid fuel
yeah,
that is on every street corner that's highly visible. I mean, and that's the huge part of that fight is all about messaging and explaining how the experience works. And then the aspect of, to your point, like if you have a single family home, yeah, you don't fill up away from home unless it is a momentous thing for like a road trip or something random. And that is another part of the conditioning factor. And the lifestyle piece is hugely important,
Yeah.
because if
yeah,
you have a single family home, you again, your entire world has changed for how you fill up,
yeah.
and that, this is where, I mean, like the Frank Luntzes of the world, who's a great communicator, and he helped create the narrative around, let's not call it climate change, let's call it global warming, let's call it this. And like,
Yeah.
he led the GOP narrative around how to basically just say we're
Talk
going to
about
spin,
everything.
yeah, we're going to spin this so hard that it's going to make it so people just have a doubt in all of it. But because he knew how to create a communication narrative around that, and people that are the very good communicators need to be leveraged in this topic. And he's even gone and spoken to people that from the Democratic Party, because of things he's now experienced with climate change, and it kind of opened his eyes around, like, oh no, like, but I can help you change your narrative. And I think one of the biggest things that's still in the way of the EV effort is that there's a lot of folks that are well intended, but they are not good communicators, and that is going to maintain being
That's
a big
putting it
issue.
pretty mildly. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think what's really interesting too is, like, for the longest time, I go back a decade, the thing that people used to say about electric vehicles is, oh, it's just about butts and seats. Someone sits in an electric vehicle, they'll start to finally get and understand it. And I think, go back a few years ago, people were like, oh, Tesla's everywhere. Or they're just, EVs were becoming more and more of a thing. And people kind of got away from that. And are like, oh, we just have to advertise to it, or we have to figure out the EV charging part of it. But consistently, I would say within this past year, again, I was reminded that the best way for people to actually understand and buy an EV is when someone either they know directly lets them sit in their electric vehicle and drive around, or B, it's also some guy in their corner or on their like cul-de-sac somewhere that buys an electric vehicle. And it's like, well, if Joe can do it, Joe's an idiot. So if he can do an EV, maybe I can do one. Or just like you start seeing it in the real world as like a practical kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a
and it's
technical.
just consistently the best understanding for people to change that mind shift. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that also kind of goes into the conversation we might be wanting to have around the challenges of the dealerships with it. But what were you going to add there, Loren?
I was just going to say what you're referring to is what's called the neighborhood effect. There's a lot of sort of research around this, like with solar, right? Where they discovered that once one person in the neighborhood gets solar, then everybody starts talking to them, asking. Then, so it's I mean, it's sort of weird and obvious, right? But yeah, if a neighborhood never gets the first solar, it doesn't go solar. But once somebody does, then it and that's what's happened on our neighborhood. I think we were the first or second, I think, in our neighborhood to get it. And now like half the neighborhood has solar, right? But the other thing I was going to mention, I had a question yesterday from a national media reporter. He's working on the NEVI story, and he was looking for the latest numbers on how many chargers there are and stuff. And he said something like, and there's 4 million households have chargers at home. And I responded to him and said, like, that's probably not the best way to think about it, because every home has an electrical outlet, and you can charge your car with just a 110 outlet, a 220 outlet. A lot of homes have washer and dryers in them, and you can use the mobile connector that comes with your car and plug in, and so again, it's that idea that, oh, you have to go out and spend $1,000 on an electrician and a level 2 charger in order to fuel your car at home. When no, the single biggest advantage of electric vehicles for those people that live in a single family home is to just pull into the garage and plug in, just like your smartphone, right?
No,
That's
I've
an
even
issue
been
of
surprised.
infrastructure for people that live in apartments and urban settings and things like that. That's a problem that we have to solve.
For sure.
Sorry,
And I think this gets to an interesting thing that is more on the product side. But we got another electric vehicle a few months ago, and we don't really have a great level 2 charger for it. So I've literally just been plugging in the wall and using it as a level 1 charger. and it has not been an issue, which even kind of surprised me. And it's like,
what do you mean? Because you don't drive 300 miles every day?
I do pretty regularly too. That's the crazy part, Loren. I mean, between my wife and I, we at least do a few 100-mile trips per week, and even then, it really hasn't been an issue, which is so crazy to think about. And I still to this day am fascinated by the fact that I can even do that. I think it is so crazy that the same outlet I put my electric toothbrush in can actually do my car.
You're brushing your teeth in the garage, Chase? This is a weird thing to admit right now.
I thought you were going to say you're brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
No, but all this topic makes me think of, like, how many single-family homes are there in the U.S.? I mean, honestly, like 100 million, tens of millions.
Over 100 million, I think.
Yeah, I want to say the number is 120 million.
Yeah, something like that.
Ballpark.
So, but that's the feedback to that one journalist you were talking to, Loren, is to say, actually, there's 120 million
charging
stations.
Electric gas stations.
Yeah, for your lowest power charging, there's 120 million of those, and cars are parked at them every day. You know what I mean? Like, somehow we have to get more creative about how we express the opportunity. But this gets to the discussion. We have this conversation all the time in the industry of, okay, but then someone says, well, how long does it take me to charge at home? And if someone says, oh, it takes me 10 seconds, I want to just rip the rest of my hair out and say, don't say that, because it takes 10 seconds to connect to a gas nozzle too. Their concern isn't the act of connecting to the fuel. It's the how long does it take to get me back on the road? That's what they're asking. So again, the communication aspect of this is so fundamental in how we could do a better job. So.
Yeah, and to that point, Matt, right? You also then hear the people's argument of, well, I'm concerned because if my little Billy falls down and gets hurt on his bicycle and I have to rush him to the emergency room, am I going to have enough range left in my vehicle to do that, right? And and there's sort of two responses to that. One is probably, at most 10 to 15 miles, unless you're out in the country, and then you're not driving an EV anyway, right? To get to the hospital. And B, most of us don't run our EV down to like 5 miles of range every night, right? Like, you have that buffer.
Well, that's that conditioning thing of, I always drive it down to E and then I go back to F and I go to E and I go to F. I mean, the amount of times I've had to remind friends of mine, even family members that have bought EVs, that they will say things to me like, oh yeah, I had to just, for some reason, I had to drive out to the outskirts of town and I only had like 28%. I'm like, you have a garage and your car's in it every night. Why? Yeah. And they go, well, yeah, but I don't plug in unless I got it. Again, that is a mental switch of, you can always be connected to your fueling source. It can slowly get you back to where you want all the time. And again, this is a consumer psychology thing that requires better messaging, without a doubt. So, and Chase to brush his teeth in his garage. I just have this picture in my mind of you're just like going into the garage and unplugging the toothbrush, plugging the car in. And
they're sharing the same outlet. I blew a fuse the other day.
Speaking of messaging, I mean, to your point, again, this is something that we could riff on for hours, Matt. But I think we've not done a good job of messaging around the value of EVs in this industry, right? Like, for the first 10 years, it was to save the planet, right? Like climate change, and then we, somebody figured out, oh, not everybody believes in that. That's not the right way to message the value of these, right? And we're going to, maybe we'll talk about this on a future show, Chase, but I provided some data to some researchers up in University of Toronto around the EV cells, and they did research on the impact on air quality, right? And anyway, that'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks and stuff. But what they found was that it had, for those markets that have a high growth of EVs, it dramatically improved the air quality.
Sure. What? Breaking news.
And it's like, I've always wondered, like, why we don't talk about, like, reducing air pollution, like things that you can actually visually see.
Well, that's a great call out. Because I was going to say that the best thing about smog is it makes great sunsets. Otherwise, it is pretty horrible. And that I think that's inherently like the issue when people talk about global warming is like, sure, you can do all these research papers and I'll be the first, like, yeah, there's really good data for it. But like visually for someone to see it, it's such a hard concept.
Yeah.
Whereas
Visually,
yeah,
it's always
smog,
help
like
explain
you
things
can
better.
go, like anyone that's been to LA or any major city, you like it's something you can actually see and point
You
to.
can actually see it. Yeah. I mean, look at the photos of LA from like, the 70s versus today.
I mean, look at China.
Again,
That's
guys,
exactly why
who
they've
values
done, why
that
they went
really?
to
Like,
electrification. And I was actually just going to say that too, Matt. Because even our conversation with Mike Murphy the other day kind of goes back to this.
Yeah.
Like, there is, people don't really buy on that factor. It is kind of sometimes a nice feel-good follow-up.
Yeah.
But I really do think the biggest thing that seems to really align with people, especially once they've owned it, is kind of like the independence and having your own fueling station at home, and then obviously like lower overall operational cost to it.
Well, and to that point you just made about revisiting the fueling at home part, and that's like having that autonomy is we are creating a class system within the fill up. I mean, that's never been a thing with gas. It's like you could drive a Bentley and live in the hills, and you could have an old Honda Civic that barely runs, and you'll pull up at the same gas station and be like, "Hi," and it unifies the fact that like, yep, we're all the same still, but when it comes to electricity and how and where you can fill up, no, it's separate now. It's very different. If you want an EV but you rent and street park, you are going to go find your public chargers, and that is your new world. Whereas, as we've discussed, but if I got a garage, I don't even think about that unless I'm like, oh, I got to go to Seattle from Portland. Okay, I got to go find a fill up. I mean, it is that consumer psychology piece has to be communicated far more effectively than what we've been doing. So,
well, I realize we're coming up on 75 minutes. And so I want to be respectful of your guys' time too. And I know we could easily keep talking for another 75 minutes, but one thing that we've kind of mentioned, but we haven't touched on that I think would be kind of a good place to end is we've talked about messaging, but also then there's the buying and purchasing experience through the dealerships.
Mm-hmm.
And I recently had another experience, kind of just talking with someone about when they were trying to buy an EV and just the education around that. And then, John, I think it's been really fascinating watching Outline and how you guys are kind of covering the feud between Scout Motors, who's trying to relaunch their electric line, and the pushback from the dealerships.
Yeah.
Why don't you just kind of, let's start there. Why don't you kind of share what you're seeing, John? And for those who might not be familiar, just give them an overview of what's going on.
Yeah, sure thing. So Scout, is an old brand. Volkswagen got its mitts on it when it bought Navistar, the big truck maker. Navistar, in its earlier history, was International Harvester. They're the ones who started Scout. So when Volkswagen bought Navistar, it got the Scout brand, and some very astute product planners inside of Volkswagen went, yowza. We could go after Jeep. We could go after Rivian. Yeah. We got a brand here that resonates. And so they started this as a standalone company, and they want to sell direct because everybody in the industry pretty much understands that selling through the franchise dealership network adds a couple of $1,000 cost to a car. And Tesla paved the way of doing it direct. In the United States, we have very strict dealer franchise laws. And the laws are written state by state. There's no nationwide one. Every one of the 50 states has its own dealer franchise law. And they're written pretty much in a way that says, if you are a manufacturer and you have used franchise dealers, you have to use them for the rest of eternity. If you're a startup like Tesla or Rivian or Scout or Lucid or anyone, it's been pretty vague, but Tesla plowed the way and said, look, we're a brand new company. We've never used these dealerships before. We don't have to. Well, Tesla's still fighting the war with one arm tied behind its back. Every state pretty much, I shouldn't say every, but most states limit Tesla's ability in some way, shape, or form to sell cars. So anyway, here comes Scout. It says, we're going to do direct. And Volkswagen dealers have said, the hell you are. Volkswagen owns Scout. it has used dealers. So by the franchise laws, you have to do it, which I find is supremely ironic, because here are the dealers who say, we want nothing to do with electric cars. Nobody wants them, but they're fighting tooth and nail to have this brand. It's all, well, I guess it's going to be EREV too, but we didn't know that earlier. So now the
Right.
NEDA, the National Auto Dealers Association, is getting involved. And what they've essentially told Volkswagen is, we're going to fight you tooth and nail on this, every single state. So I wondered why Tesla hadn't done this. And I know we've talked about this before. Take it to the circuit courts, take it to the Supreme Court. You know, don't waste your time trying to fight 50 states of legal battles. Get this thing appealed. My own personal opinion, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the legality of all this, but, you know, I learned back in high school that restraint of interstate trade is illegal. And to tell a company that is building cars that, oh, no, you can only sell your cars through franchise dealers. I mean, that's like telling the public you can only buy hamburgers through franchisees like, you know, McDonald's
Right.
and Burger King and things like that. So Volkswagen and Scout say they're going to fight this thing. They've clearly, you know, are going to fight it. My question is, are they going to fight it in every one of the 50 states? And, you know, as I said earlier, I believe the NADA is the most powerful lobby in Washington. They got an uphill fight against them. And oh, by the way, Honda's in the mix now too, right? Because it's working with Sony on this new brand called Afeela.
Right.
Yeah.
And they want to go direct. And the Honda dealers are going, oh, wait a minute. No, you're not. So this is going to build to a head, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it works out. But one thing's for sure, the lawyers are going to make a boatload of money.
Yeah, and John, it's interesting because, if it does go to the Supreme Court, which way would they go on this?
Yeah.
Well, they'll
That's
look
all
Right,
over.
because on one hand, they're like, they don't like to, the conservative side doesn't like to inhibit people and companies from doing things. That's the mantra. On the other hand, who funds their campaigns, right? Auto dealers.
Yeah, well,
right?
that's in Congress. So it'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does, and what role does Elon Musk play in this? What effect is he going to have?
I have a very interesting anecdotal experience to share with this, actually, because in the state of Washington, where I live now, it is illegal for like Rivian and other electric vehicle companies to sell here direct, or even have like showrooms where they can show price and all that stuff. And about a decade ago, Tesla did get a carve out. And back then, they're just like, oh, this little electric car company, nothing's going to happen. And even since then, they've tried to kind of tamper it down a little bit. And I actually had the opportunity to go to the beautiful Olympia, Washington, the state's capital, and meet with some legislators about changing this. And I think what's so funny was this became a conversation about being pro-choice. And that usually means something else. And coincidentally, the Republicans that I met with were actually the most open to it. And the Democrats actually kind of pushed back a lot of concerns around jobs for those who are in the district. So there's this kind of really, it doesn't always follow the political lines that I think most people expect. And what I found like really fascinating, not to tie it back to this, usually the biggest thing, it wasn't even the jobs, it wasn't even the education, it wasn't even the very aggressive clean energy goals that the state of Washington has, that allowing more electric vehicles would help them get to. It was, well, I mean, Tesla has a carve out, and this would cause competition to Tesla. And every time, whichever Democratic representative or person I was talking to, like, oh, they kind of pop like, I could hurt Elon Musk. And it's just like, and that to me was so disappointing as a citizen. It's like, I don't care about that. I don't care about your speaker, like getting a little soundbite. It's just like, I, as a consumer, would like the choice. And two, like there's environmental and also job relations too. But it goes back to what you're saying, like the North American Dealership Association, quite a few other groups that have been paid were there to represent. And the first thing they said, well, we always hire the little league baseball things, but both the Republican representatives I met were like really honest about it. But they're like, at the same time, like, I don't see why this wouldn't be a thing. when we're the only state on the West Coast that doesn't do this, and the dealerships have continued to grow. So that is, I don't know if that, I think it just goes to what you're talking about. Like, I think it could go to the Supreme Court, and it wouldn't surprise me if it did pass. But also is just how these things have been going. It just doesn't, it isn't as linear, or the outcomes don't really tie to the expectations that I'm seeing, just because of how crazy the current political environment is just across the board.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And go ahead.
I was just going to ask John a question, and because VinFast sort of was going to initially go direct, right, and then they started working with dealers, but I've not heard much on how that's going. I mean, obviously they're very low volume, but are you up on what's going on with them?
Yeah, I don't know what the status of that is, but Fisker ran into the same thing. Remember, Fisker was going to sell direct, and then they realized, there's a lot of dealers out there, and they could really help us move the metal.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's cheaper to go direct, but we got to sell cars. And so there's always going to be a balance. I mean, there's an advantage to dealerships. There really is. There's disadvantages, don't get me wrong, but you got to go someplace to pick the car up, and you got to take it someplace to be serviced. And so I don't know if we end up with a hybrid system somewhere down the road, but right now, I'm telling you, the dealers are in the driver's seat. They've got all the legal power.
It's, I mean, no other way to put it. I mean, they hold the purse strings in their local communities, and as a collective, they are. I totally agree with your assessment that they're the strongest lobbying group, without a doubt. And I think that, so I mean, anecdotally, I did a training this week with a showroom that has one of our ChargeWay beacons in it, and which is our kiosk that explains how EV charging works for any EV, and they've got new and used vehicles on the lot. And the team that was there that we did this, again, it was a web training, but went through all the features and everything else and how it worked. And some of these people have been working there for years, and it was very interesting just how, again, in that just single moment, that one showroom, of at the end of a 30-minute phone call, having them all say, this was really informative. None of us knew anything about this. Like we didn't know that was a thing, or there was a tool that showed how you could use an adapter with just that car and everything else. And it was just, again, tiny sliver window into the 10. I mean, there's over 15,000 new franchise dealers, and there's, thousands of used car dealerships around the U.S. That was just a little window into, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And part of the fight I think we see is that, again, I love the comment of, like, John, to your point, like, well, they're saying they don't want EVs because they can't sell them, or they don't know how to sell them, but then they're fighting tooth and nail to say, no, you got to sell your EVs through us. So it's they understand that it is part of their future, but they don't have a good answer as to how to basically be a player in this space right now that shows they have, basically the ability to say, but no, we know what we're doing too. And again, I think that it's because of, again, back to the conditioning thing, whether it's people buying the cars or people selling them, we are still decoding what we've known for a long time. And to try to sell both of those side by side, the gas car experience and the electric car experience, that is an education, and that is something that needs to be managed. And right now, we've seen efforts that have been made even through the NADA. And I mean, my team has worked with the team at the NADA before. The scale of which we have to do it is massive, and there has to be a lot of funding for it. And maybe that could have happened with the previous administration, but something tells me that won't happen with the current administration. Just to guess.
I think the NADA thing unto itself is its own very large challenge. But I will say one of the things I've heard from a few different people, and it was even brought up again with the dealership I was talking to about a month ago, where as far as that education component, they found by far the most effective way is to let their salespeople have one for like 72 hours. Let them take the EV, or like 72 hours to a week, have it for like a long weekend, and just drive it around and use it as like their personal car. And they found that so many of their salespeople not only kind of got it, but they actually were just actively selling it because they just thought it was so cool. They didn't have to go to the gas station, all this other stuff. Now that, I don't know if that's going to solve the problem, but I think that is definitely a big part of kind of that education piece, to at least all the strings and stuff kind of being pulled and going on in the background between the dealership owners and like the dealership associations. That's a whole nother challenge. But I think just having the interaction between the person buying a car and the person either selling or educating the car, knowing what they're talking about and actually being passionate about it, makes such a night and day difference.
Or just genuinely genuinely
Yeah, exactly.
knowledgeable about it, right? It's
Right.
I mean, right now, is there another industry that we know of that has had these types of evolutions where the traditional salespeople have had to try to sell this evolution of the product, and it's obvious they don't know how to talk about it. That's not a pathway to success. And this is precisely why Tesla years ago said, we're not going to try to get dealers to sell what we're building because they're not going to be able to explain it for us. That was a big part of what their motivation was. And so, I think, John, I think your comment of on one hand, they're saying people don't want them. We don't know how to sell them. This is a struggle. And on the other hand, they're saying, you got to sell them through us, though. It's the acknowledgement of, we recognize this is something we have to be a part of. We're just still at the very early stages of how this entire market is going to grow and have an impact. So even though we've all been doing it for years and decades. So.
Yeah, and Matt, and we I think we've talked about this on past shows. It's it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. I mean, remember years ago, I was part of a small group of 4 reporters that got to go in a private room with Mark Royce, the number 2 guy at GM, and we were talking to him a lot about things. And he was pretty candid, and he said, EVs are a hobby for our dealers, right? Like if they have one EV model out of 20 models or whatever, it's like whatever. They're not going to get. But when we get to the point where there kind of are now, right, where there's like, what is it, five Chevrolet EVs or something, right? Like, and a couple of them are selling well, the Equinox and the Blazer and stuff like that. And then, the Cadillac Lyric is selling well and stuff. And now there's 3, electric Cadillacs now out on the market, or if they're not, they will be in the next couple of days or weeks or whatever it is. But, then it's like, if we've got like multiple models and they're selling well and people are coming in asking for them, maybe we actually have to start knowing what regenerative braking is, because we didn't know it last year. Like I literally had that experience, right, where my wife and I took a test drive of Mercedes a couple years ago, and the sales guy, like, I don't think the car has regenerative braking.
Well, in fairness, like, I bought an Audi in 2003, and I was at the Audi showroom, and I was telling the guy what I wanted, and I said, what do you have on the lot? And I wanted an A4, and I wanted a 1.8T because I wanted a turboed car, because I wanted to maybe upgrade the turbo one day and everything else. And I said, he's like, well, no, we got an A4 right there. And I said, yeah, but that's the 3.0. I said, I want the 1.8T because it's turbo. And he goes, oh man, all Audis are turboed. And I went, but it's not. So this,
I mean, that's such a common thing. Like it's such an interesting time too, that the consumer is usually, in a lot of cases, better informed than sometimes the people selling these vehicles.
Of course,
unfortunately,
because they're
especially
excited to buy the product, and some of these folks are just, again, the human element is so much of what we're talking about. Of people being passionate, wanting to be informed, just having basic information, tools that that they can leverage to do their jobs better. And kind of full circle on our entire conversation is just, but man, right now there's so much noise. We're all tired. I mean, I don't know how many times you hang out with your friends and family, and it's like, how you doing? I'm just tired, man. And so when it gets to that point where we're all kind of like overloaded, that's part of the challenge too, is we have to be just even slightly motivated to be engaged, to have these discussions and learn something new. And, that's how we move forward in this industry is going to require those of us who've been doing it for a long time to maintain some level of energy around, we can keep going. Yeah. Even though right now there's not a clean pathway of how we can solve all these problems, but we just got to keep going. So,
but I think that's about as good of a point to wrap it on, with some optimism there in the end. John, one final question. Wasn't the reason that Scout Motors even went out of business anyway was due to bad dealership sales or something like that? Or do you remember the history of that?
Remember, they were part of Navistar. What's Navistar sell? Class 7 and 8 semi trucks, so they're not in
very
exactly the urban centers where most buyers are.
No, that's a good point. But
for first car wreck I was ever in, I got hit by an International Scout.
Wow.
And boy, that thing was like a tank.
Listen, I actually test drove one. That's how long I've been in the business. I think it was either 1979 or 1980, and I think they went out of business in 80 or 81. But I lived just outside Detroit, a place called Farmington Hills, and Farmington Hills actually had a dealer that had them, and I called up Scout and arranged to do a test drive for a week. Had a lot of fun with it. This was, by the way, I should add, when I was in high school, trucks. My first job was washing U.S. Post Office trucks for the city of Farmington. And it had a number of Scouts, right-hand steering with a three on the floor. And as a 16-year-old, I was in heaven getting to drive these things.
So, John, I'm not quite this old, but I think my first vehicle was a 1954 International Harvester pickup, which I inherited from my grandfather.
That's awesome.
So, those are also great. I mean, I got to be honest, I'm actually pretty excited with at least some of the products that Scout's announced. We'll see if it's even possible or how easy they are to buy. But with that, I think we've crossed the 90-minute mark. So I'm going to just cut it off now. John, Loren, Matt, thank you so much for coming on again. We'll have to do this again soon. This has just always been a fun conversation, and can't wait to do the next one.
And we're guaranteed to have something to talk about.
Exactly.
Thanks, Chase.
Thanks, Chase.
All right, thanks.
That's a wrap on today's Grid Connections panel. Huge thanks again to John McElroy, Loren McDonald, and Matt Teske for all of their insights on the evolving electric vehicle landscape, from shifting policies and dealership battles to Tesla's brand shakeup and the state of EV charging infrastructure. If you found this discussion valuable, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with at least one person who'd enjoy it too. And while you're at it, leave us a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps more people discover Grid Connections and keeps the conversation going. Want to stay ahead of the latest electric vehicle trends? Sign up for our brand new Grid Connections newsletter using the link in today's show notes. Until next week, this is the Grid Connections podcast signing off.